The Ukrainian armed forces are roasting the occupiers on the front lines, smashing their headquarters and equipment to pieces. Russian soldiers are massively trading weapons, grenades and assault rifles, straight from the front lines deep into the rear. And the number of deserters is growing rapidly, with the world's second-largest army already falling apart before our eyes. Zelensky is trolling Putin, saying, "Come to Kyiv and let's talk. Russia is facing a gas shortage, and even the leader himself admits it. Residents of the DPR were threatened with criminal charges for complaining about the lack of water." Putin took Alina Kabaeva out for a walk. The dictator's companion strutted down the red carpet in China. Hello, my name is Anastasia Dmitrovskaya. Right now, here are the main headlines. Before we begin, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. Ukrainian intelligence located an enemy command post and a concentration of occupiers, and a single precise strike by a pilot from the Segnyom battalion turned that place into a real hell. Meanwhile, in the Donetsk direction, the strike drone operators of Laser from the 27th Pechersk Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine destroyed an enemy Irka-Buka M1 launcher with an estimated value of about $10 million. Meanwhile, near Maliuk, fighters from the 118th Brigade struck an entire column of Russians, tanks with electronic warfare systems, mine-clearing vehicles, and equipment-carrying troops. All of it was destroyed before it even reached its destination. Meanwhile, in the Donetsk region, special forces from the GUR and the Bratstvo unit destroyed an enemy shelter, thwarting the Russians' plans to break through toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. Despite their losses, both in equipment and manpower, the occupiers are preparing for autumn offensives, with Pokrovsk at the epicenter. Our review covers what is happening on the front lines at this very moment and around it.
Our forces are advancing and reclaiming Ukrainian territories. Successes in Novopavlivka and near Kostiantynivka, a treacherous strike by the occupiers against a humanitarian mission. The Russian armed forces confirmed that they targeted the demining group specifically. The largest Russian troop rotation of the year, the ongoing rout of enemy forces near Dobropilia, and Putin's plans for an autumn offensive. Will the Russians be able to achieve success in 2025? All the latest frontline news right now. Another cynical crime by Russian troops in the Chernihiv region. The Russians deliberately struck workers of a humanitarian demining mission, the Danish Refugee Council. At this moment, it is known that 2 people have been killed and 5 wounded. At the same time, the Russian armed forces confirmed the strike, presenting it as an attack on UAV units in the armed forces of Ukraine. However, when it comes to fighting real soldiers, not imaginary ones, the Russians are not doing so well. The hottest front in recent months, Pokrovsk, is holding strong and giving a worthy response to the enemy, according to the Ukrainian command. Attempts to encircle the city are failing completely day after day.
The attempt to encircle Pokrovsk from the west also could not be revived, despite Russian tactical successes in the villages of Udakhne and Kotlina. Similarly, on the western flank, the Russians failed to enter the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk region. It is worth noting that the offensive here is purely for propaganda purposes. The Russian command wants to claim control over a part of the region where, even in 2022, not a single Russian soldier had set foot. However, at least in the Pokrovsk direction, the Russian armed forces are not succeeding, despite many months of fighting for the administrative border with endless assaults.
Even the reserves brought in from the north are not helping the Russians achieve their objectives. As a result of the largest redeployment this year, tens of thousands of additional Russian troops were transferred to the Pokrovsk area. This weakened the Sumy direction, but due to constant failures, the occupiers had already lost interest in it anyway.
At the moment, the maximum depth of advance by Russian occupation forces is no more than 4 to 5 kilometers. The defense forces of Ukraine are successfully deoccupying settlements in the Sumy region that had been under the temporary control of the Russian Federation's occupation forces. The plans for the Sumy region have completely failed. This is precisely why the redeployment of the 155th Marine Brigade is taking place. Meanwhile,
the newly arrived reserves of the Ukrainian armed forces have already had a chance to get acquainted with the situation. Thus, the day before, 4 fighters from the Skala unit managed to capture twice as many enemy soldiers on their very first combat mission. That is, almost an entire squad of occupiers. As a result, our exchange fund was replenished with 9 Russians.
They were told by the service to drop their weapons, to take off their equipment, sit quietly, everything will be fine. They behave calmly, we're given water to drink, and we're told like a Gitarini.
Another area where Russian prisoners are now counted by the dozens is near Dobropilya. The salient that the occupiers managed to create has been cut off, and no success is expected for the enemy there.
We can already say that the exchange fund of Ukraine's defense forces has been replenished by more than 60 Russian occupiers, and according to the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, the total losses of Russian occupiers in the Dobropilya direction have exceeded 1,000 personnel in just a week of fighting. These are extremely serious losses for the Russian occupation army.
At the same time, under such difficult conditions, the Ukrainian armed forces still manage to advance. For example, in the past 24 hours near Kostiantynivka, the northern part of the settlement of Katerinivka was liberated. Our defense forces have also advanced west of Andriivka-Klevtseve, continuing to push back the occupiers' bridgehead in the Novopavlivka direction.
The Ukrainian army is having a hard time, no doubt, but right now it is even counterattacking. Yes, these may not be large-scale counteroffensives, but nevertheless they are very serious counterstrikes, including at that very Dobropilya salient. It seemed, and many were saying, that this was it, the collapse of the front had begun, the Russian army had broken through, but no, the Ukrainian armed forces counterattacked, stabilized the situation there, and now there is a reverse movement.
And experts say that the Russians have nowhere to expect significant successes from. For example, analyst Pavel Norozhny believes that for the Russian army to advance now, they need armored vehicles, otherwise small infantry groups have virtually no chance. However, the Russian leadership is not providing infantry with equipment, and there has been no air support at all for about 6 months now.
The use of Su-25 aircraft, which used to operate right near the front line, has practically stopped. If they are used at all, they operate from a very long distance, or it's just some kind of demonstration firing to make a video for RIA Novosti or TASS. In general, Russia stopped risking its aviation quite a while ago, and by 2025, these risks are almost completely eliminated.
Meanwhile, the Russian press continues to talk about a victorious autumn offensive. According to Vitaly Gisak, commander of the 423rd Unmanned Systems Battalion, it will be even more disastrous than the summer one, because with the arrival of cold weather, there will be no so-called greenery, which means enemy troop concentrations will become more visible, something our drone pilots are already eagerly anticipating.
The enemy has offensive priorities, and today they are obvious. We should also mention the activity and the very difficult, even extremely difficult situation in the Lyman and Sivers directions. We are also seeing a difficult situation in the Kupiansk area. Of course, we are talking about Zaporizhzhia, because in Zaporizhzhia, the enemy is actively using, let's say, diversionary actions as well, but the main focus is Donetsk region.
The priority is Donetsk region, and for us, it's not just about the front line, but also the rear, as was recently reminded to the occupiers in the city of Selidov, where an entire ammunition depot was blown up right under the nose of the Russian command.
Russian soldiers are transporting large quantities of weapons from the front.
12 Kalashnikov assault rifles, 6 machine guns, a Dragunov sniper rifle, a grenade launcher, 2 Glock pistols, magazines, and over 3,000 rounds of ammunition. This arsenal was found by traffic police officers in the Voronezh region in the trunk of a serviceman from the Akhmat Russia regiment Bekan Masayev.
Journalists from Danyaverska reported that the man called these weapons trophies from the war with Ukraine, and such detentions, according to journalists, are happening every week across the country as Russian soldiers are transporting weapons en masse, which are then sold, used in disputes with relatives, or simply kept as souvenirs.
It is not difficult to take out and sell weapons from the Special Military Operation Zone because they are written off in advance, one of the servicemen explained to Verska. A stockpile of weapons for a rainy day is built up during periods when nothing is happening at the positions. Every day, the command submits a report on losses, and if there are none, the figures are simply copied from the previous report. This is how a stockpile appears that does not exist on paper, but in reality is stored in warehouses.
Verska also found out that after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the number of criminal cases against Russian servicemen initiated under articles related to illegal activities. On the contrary, the amount of weapons has increased at least threefold, and prices for weapons have also gone up.
On the darknet, judging by the ads posted on forums that Verska studied, the prices for weapons have increased tenfold during the war. In 2025, the price of Kalashnikov rifles starts at 300,000 rubles. In 2022, they were being sold for 52,000 rubles. In 2022, a Makarov pistol could be bought for 23,000 rubles, but in 2025, it costs between 300,000 and 350,000.
As we can see, despite the fact that the number of criminal cases has increased several times over, the problem of illegal arms trafficking is still, so to speak, relevant. And the prices, which have only gone up in the past 3+ years, are further evidence that there is demand. And as we know, where there is demand, there is also supply. Well, it's not just about arms trafficking. The number of deserters in the Russian army is growing catastrophically. Driven to the front, forcibly and foolishly, Russians who signed contracts have tasted the horrors of Putin's war and the cruelty of their commanders. They are dropping their weapons and fleeing, risking imprisonment, but at least hoping to stay alive. Details about what is really happening in Putin's army are in our report.
The number of deserters in the Russian army has at least tripled over the past 2 years. The Go to the Woods project, which helps people avoid mobilization in Russia, has published statistics on requests from those wishing to desert from Putin's army. For example, in the summer of 2023, there were only 381 such people on the organization's website, but by the summer of 2025, that many deserters are reaching out to activists every month. And over the entire summer, the number of draft dodger cases reached 1,171.
Most of the deserters are contract soldiers, including former conscripts who are being forced to sign contracts, and there are still appeals from those recruited from pre-trial detention centers. More and more often, those who have been putting off making a decision for a year in the hope of a truce are returning, and the number of people deceived by promises is growing. Promises of payments, which they are then forced either to hand over or to go into battle, where, according to the soldiers themselves, the chance of dying reaches 90%.
However, other Russian activists insist that the figures provided by the Idait Lesem organization are significantly understated. The project in its research relies exclusively on the number of appeals made specifically to their organization. Russian journalists assert that the real number of deserters from the Russian army is much higher.
During the war, more than 18,000 soldiers in Russia have been convicted for desertion or unauthorized absence from their unit. But these are very rough estimates, as official statistics on such cases stopped being published in 2023. It was shut down by order of the FSB and the Ministry of Defense, obviously to conceal the scale of desertion.
Meanwhile, desertion in Russia is becoming a widespread phenomenon. Now, even those who went to fight out of conviction are fleeing from the front, analysts explain. Kremlin propaganda is no longer working on the front lines. In its place, on the front line, come blocking detachments. Russians who were lucky enough to escape tell of execution squads that have no qualms about opening fire on their own men.
Climbing over the barbed wire. There's barbed wire, just a post with barbed wire. But the cart was smashed, so we went on. And when we finally got there, climbed over the barbed wire, they said there was no one there, nowhere to be seen. It's some kind of local value. It's not clear who owns it, not with sticks, not with holsters. So to clarify, he ran out, and I can't say that you were close enough to the points, probably 25 or 30 away, so there was no moisture there. Lydia? My friend and I somehow stood up, but I think our side saved us. It just saved us, because something flew right past us, but I didn't notice them. And the second one, their other guy, they shot him right away. Well, of course, we didn't climb over them because they fired from the port machine guns. Then they sat down, finished them off completely, and in that kind of control, with a volley of shots, and then they moved on.
After many long months, Georgy was lucky. He was finally able to leave Russia. However, luck doesn't smile on everyone, admits the former mobilized soldier. According to him, almost every other Russian deserter at the front is either caught and simply wiped out, or sent on an assault mission, most likely to their death. So it turns out all the numbers need to be multiplied by at least 2.
Experts believe that the total number of deserters could reach up to 60,000 people, which is about a tenth of the entire army.
And this number will only continue to grow because desertion, despite the threat of being shot, is sometimes much better than this kind of life in the trenches, without uniforms, shelter, or provisions.
This is the kind of water we drink. See, I'm just looking at it with one cheek.
What is there to be surprised about when entire crippled regiments and units made up of the terminally ill are being formed in the Russian army? These are separate units consisting of servicemen with HIV, hepatitis, tuberculosis, and other serious diseases. Such soldiers are sent to assault units along with deserters and those who do not want to fight for Putin.
In fact,
Such a situation, desertion from the front, even at gunpoint, doesn't seem like such a hopeless idea. On the contrary, as activists from the Go to the Woods project assert, fleeing becomes the only reasonable alternative in Putin's army. And so analysts say the number of deserters in the Russian armed forces will grow exponentially.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Putin should come to Kyiv. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in an interview with ABC News, responded to Putin's earlier invitation to Moscow.
He said he would meet if I came to Moscow. He can come to Kyiv. You see, if a person doesn't want to meet during a war, of course, he can suggest something that's unacceptable to me or to others. That's understandable. I can't go to Moscow when my country is under shelling, under attack every day. I can't go to the capital of these terrorists. That's understandable, and he understands that. It's the same proposal as I already said. He should come to Kyiv.
Russian propagandist Olga Skabieva has already responded to this and hinted that Zelensky should be afraid.
Zelensky is taking a risk. And what if Putin actually comes? And what if neither of them does? After all, he already came in 2022.
Speaking of how Putin invited Zelensky to Moscow, there too, everything went by the book. I'm ready to meet and I want peace, but here's the condition.
So what do the current authorities need to do if they want to be legitimate and fully participate in the settlement process? They need to hold elections. First and foremost. They need to hold a referendum in accordance with the Constitution of Ukraine. Any questions regarding territories, any at all, are resolved only through a referendum. Well, as far as I remember. But a referendum cannot be held under martial law. That's also a constitutional provision, part of the Constitution itself. So in order to hold a referendum, martial law must be lifted. But as soon as that's done, elections must be held. And this process will go on endlessly.
In short, nothing new. The main strategy of the bunker dweller, in my opinion, is to say one thing and do something completely different. For example, meeting with Trump during the day and talking about wanting peace, and then in the evening of the same day launching missiles at Ukraine. After the special operation Web by the Security Service of Ukraine, the Russian Federation relocated its strategic aviation to the Ukrainka airfield. This has made strikes on Ukraine more difficult. The head of the Security Service of Ukraine, Vasyl Maliuk, says that after Web, Russia can no longer use fewer aircraft for missile and Shahed drone attacks.
They were forced to move their strategic aircraft to the easternmost point, the Ukrainka airfield. And now, in order to get closer to Ukrainian territory and to the launch sites, they have to cover a very long distance. Moreover, this accelerates the wear and tear of various engine components on these aircraft, and they quickly lose their engine life.
By the way, the Ukrainka airfield is located in Russia's Amur region. That's 5,960 kilometers from Ukraine. And in fact, during the special operation Web, a strike was carried out on Russian airfields using drones, as a result of which 41 Russian aircraft were negatively affected. I see in the comments that we have a lot of viewers from Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, the USA, and Europe. We are very grateful to you for your support. Let us know which country you're watching us from and whether you believe that good will triumph over evil in this war. I'll be happy to read your comments this evening and like the ones I enjoy the most. Now let's continue. Next comes the most interesting part. The great gas power without gas. Putin has warned that Russia is facing a gas shortage. Despite having the world's largest proven gas reserves, over 60 trillion cubic meters, Russia may face a gas shortage. Putin made this statement at the Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok. Our journalists have all the details.
A public admission. The Kremlin dictator has revealed his hand. Soon there will be no gas left in Russia.
It certainly won't be an easy task, especially considering all the circumstances we have just discussed. But we must strive for this. That's precisely why those specific and crucial special support measures that I previously mentioned are currently being developed and implemented.
For the first time, Putin spoke about a gas shortage in a country that for decades prided itself on being a gas superpower.
In the coming years, a multiple increase in demand for natural gas is expected in the Far East. Signs of a shortage are already visible in the region. It is sometimes difficult to supply new enterprises.
According to the dictator, the energy infrastructure is fragmented, there are no connections between gas networks, and the level of network development is extremely low. Essentially, this is a failure of the Kremlin's energy policy.
For Russia, as for the Soviet Union, resources are primarily needed in order to sell them abroad and make money from it. Supplying these resources and products to the domestic market is not really a fundamental part of the state's overall philosophy and strategic approach.
Gas production in Russia has been declining since the start of the war with Ukraine, which cut Gazprom off from its key European market. Having lost more than half of its exports, Gazprom promises to redirect the surplus gas to Russian consumers. The complete gasification of the country will be finished by 2030, promised the head of the company, Alexei Miller, in 2022 during a meeting with Putin. But all of this is just empty promises. Russia possesses gas reserves of more than 60 trillion cubic meters, yet even so, it cannot supply its own regions.
It's absolutely normal for Russia that in many villages where gas pipelines pass by, there is no gas, because the gas isn't for them, it's for export. And as for those who live near these pipelines, well, it means nothing to them. So, I haven't seen any recent statistics. The last figure I came across was from 2019, which said that the gasification of villages in Russia was at 69%. That means 31% across Russia are simply not connected to gas. It's basic, they just don't see the point in it in Russia.
Apparently, these people have nothing to hope for, since Putin even suggested switching to coal, which, according to him, will last for almost 1,000 years.
Since the beginning of this year, there has been talk that they will probably have to close the mines, and not just a few, but shut down mines on a large scale. These companies are suffering huge losses, but of course they used to earn most of their profits in Europe, and China and other markets don't bring them the same profits. And that's why people in Russia are now saying, what are we supposed to do with all this coal? We don't know. And here comes Putin's statement. Well, yes, we have problems with gas, but we have plenty of coal. We can use coal to compensate for many, many years to come. It seems to me that this is an attempt to send a signal to those coal regions that no, we still need you.
But it's not just gas that's going to disappear from Russia. The country has just a little over 20 years' worth of profitable oil reserves left. At the current rate of extraction, the country risks losing its main source of income and export currency.
And then there are the sanctions. When people talk about American sanctions and how they've affected things, first and foremost, it's because America banned its oil and gas service companies from doing business in Russia. And it was precisely because these companies were operating there that Russia had access to technology. When they left, extracting oil and gas became more difficult because it was these companies that knew how to do it most efficiently. They had the technology. When these companies left and took their technology with them, Russia started having problems.
Against the backdrop of war and sanctions, Russia's energy system is being depleted. With each passing day, more and more problems are arising.
We understand just how important the oil and gas sector is for Russia above all else. And if Russia stops making money from it, it will only worsen the budget crisis and further deplete resources, because many of these sources of income from external activities contribute to national well-being. And now, as of September 1st, I don't have the data, but as of August 1st, it was 4 trillion rubles, and the deficit is already 4.9 with the skip.
Following oil and gas, the metallurgical industry is also collapsing. Metallurgists have faced a sharp drop in demand, and the biggest risk posed by the current crisis is a complete halt in development. According to Rosstat, last year, Russian metallurgy reduced output by 1.5% despite demand from defense factories, and this year the decline has accelerated into a collapse.
The metallurgical industry is facing several problems. Problem number one is the very expensive loans that are available due to the key interest rate. In other words, the key rate, let's put it this way, significantly limits opportunities. Problem number two is the strong ruble.
All of this inevitably leads to significant financial problems, and a complete economic collapse within Russia is now only a matter of time. A truly dire situation.
Ladies and gentlemen, it might seem that the water situation in Donetsk couldn't possibly get any worse, but
as the head of the United Russia faction in the People's Council of the Donetsk People's Republic, I am also addressing the investigative committee. I ask you to look into this statement, to check everything and provide a full assessment, because in this statement, in my opinion, there is nothing but lies. And with the help of these lies, such individuals are trying to stir up and destabilize the situation within the country so that it benefits, I don't know, some third parties. It is up to the investigative authorities to determine who benefits from this. And if there are violations here, I ask that all necessary measures be taken so that people are not misled by such deception, and so that no one calls for destabilizing the situation.
In fact, this is the People's Deputy Valery Skorokodov. And yes, you heard that right. He is demanding that those dissatisfied with the catastrophic water shortage be prosecuted. Skorokodov is convinced that people sounding the alarm over the lack of water are acting in the interests of certain forces and are destabilizing the situation. Meanwhile, in Donetsk, those very people who are supposedly acting in the interests of some outside forces and destabilizing the situation, they're standing in line for water.
Another batch of water has arrived, thank God. We finally got it. The rush was absolutely enormous. Don't give out 4 at a time. No. Come on. So there's enough for everyone. No, just 2. 2 isn't enough anywhere. Maybe not enough. Well, sorry, that's just how it is.
There's also a gasoline shortage in Donetsk right now. And how long do you think it will take before the local authorities accuse people who talk about the gasoline shortage of destabilizing the situation?
There's a shortage of 95-octane gasoline in Donetsk, with long lines at the gas stations that still have it. I don't understand why there's such a serious shortage. Do you know what it's related to? There's just no 95-octane anywhere. No one knows what the reason is. The line keeps getting longer and longer.
I don't even have words for this. To drive people to live like this and then blame them for it. What can I say? This is the Russian world as it really is. Belarus and Russia are training for an attack on Poland. This was stated by the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. And in fact, that's how Tusk described the joint Russian-Belarusian military exercises Zapad 2025.
These exercises are aggressive and simulate an attack, not a defense. Poland is preparing to take special measures against Belarus in the event of provocations.
Meanwhile, the United States will stop funding the program for training and equipping the armed forces of Eastern European countries. The Financial Times writes that this decision is, quote, connected to U.S. President Donald Trump's policy of reassessing and redistributing foreign aid.
The actions of the United States are driven by Donald Trump's policy of reassessing and redistributing foreign aid, as well as the emphasis that Europe should take greater responsibility for its own defense, the Financial Times quotes a White House representative as saying. According to the publication, European officials who attended the meeting with Pentagon representatives were stunned by the news of the funding cutoff. This is causing great concern and uncertainty, a source familiar with the negotiations told the FT.
So while the White House is deciding whether to end funding for the program to train and equip the armed forces of EU countries, Russia is conducting exercises with the Belarusians on the Polish border and at the same time testing the EU's red lines to see if they can be pushed back if necessary. And once again, there's the threat of an eco-catastrophe on Venus. After an accident during the loading of a tanker in the Novorossiysk harbor, at least 10 tons of petroleum products spilled into the Black Sea. The large-scale oil spill in the Black Sea, which occurred as a result of an accident at a Russian terminal, has reached alarming proportions. An oil slick covering 350 square kilometers is moving toward the temporarily occupied Crimea, posing a serious threat to the ecosystem and coastal regions. More details about all this in our report.
The Black Sea is one of the region's main ecosystems, sustaining millions of people and supporting the lives of thousands of marine species. But today, even it has come under threat. At the end of August, an accident occurred off the coast of Novorossiysk, which could become one of the most serious environmental disasters in recent years.
Well, first of all, this is, of course, an environmental disaster. That's absolutely clear. The ship captains violated the relevant regulations and did not seek shelter in time. Almost 40% of the fuel leaked out.
On August 29th, during the transfer of petroleum products through a floating hose while loading a tanker, a rupture occurred. According to official statements from Russian authorities, about 30 cubic meters of oil entered the sea. Just a few hours later, assurances were made. The spill had been contained, everything was under control, and supposedly there was no danger. However, the reality told a different story.
Here you can clearly see the scale of the tragedy. It's already turning into a layered cake of fuel oil and sand. Look at how deep it has already penetrated. We have to remove a layer of sand about 50 to 60 centimeters thick.
International organizations and independent environmental experts studied satellite images and reported the area of contamination was at least 50 square kilometers in the first hours, and then the oil slick grew to an even larger scale, about 350 square kilometers. At least 10 tons of petroleum products ended up on the surface of the Black Sea.
It smells like being at an oil refinery. The entire coastline is covered with black spots.
This is honestly, damn, a catastrophe, damn, an environmental disaster, damn. It's simply an environmental disaster.
And the most worrying thing is that the slick is moving. Driven by currents, it is gradually moving toward the Kerch Strait, threatening the coast of temporarily occupied Crimea. Already today, experts are recording the spread heading precisely in that direction. This means that in the near future, the pollution could reach the shoreline, affecting beaches and resort areas.
Friends, that's the situation. The first time I went into the sea, I immediately got one of my feet dirty right on my socks, and it doesn't wash off.
This isn't funny, it's a catastrophe.
The consequences for the ecosystem are simply enormous. An oil film, even if it's less than a millimeter thick, blocks oxygen from reaching the water. As a result, fish, mollusks, and other marine organisms die en masse.
Mazout is the residue left after oil distillation. In other words, it's a heavy, what we also call a bottom residue. That is, all the volatile fractions have evaporated, and what's left is a heavy, oily liquid rich in asphaltenes with lots of sulfur, nitrogen, and heavy metals. Yes? So that's what mazout is.
That's exactly why environmentalists are sounding the alarm. What the Russian authorities call a localized incident is, in reality, turning into a regional disaster. Oil doesn't stay in one place. It moves, it spreads, and stopping it in the open sea is extremely difficult. Today, international organizations are demanding that independent experts be allowed to participate in the cleanup efforts. But the Russian side continues to claim that the situation poses no threat. Meanwhile, satellite images and monitoring data show the opposite. The pollution is increasing. So what happens next? If cleanup measures are not taken in the near future, the consequences will be catastrophic not only for nature. Other sectors will also be hit. Tourism, fishing, the economy, all of these depend on the cleanliness of the Black Sea.
During Putin's recent visit to China, along with the delegation of, so to speak, state, people of Russia, Alina Kabaeva was spotted. In Beijing, the mother of the Kremlin dictator's children flaunted her status at the premiere of the Russian-Chinese film Red Silk.
Putin also brought his beloved Alina Kabaeva to China. Moreover, she had a rather important political mission.
A film embodying the wisdom of Russia and China. This is how the first reviews of the blockbuster Red Silk are coming out today.
This is a fragment from the trailer of the film Red Silk. It's a joint project between Russia and China, which was already shown in our country back in February. But the Chinese audience will only get to see it now. And it was precisely for the premiere of this film that Alina Kabaeva arrived.
I am very glad to be here in China at the premiere of the film Red Silk, which of course is an example of the high level of Russian-Chinese partnership and the warm relations between our countries. It is important that the film's premiere is taking place in the year marking the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory in the Great Patriotic War and the Chinese people's victory in the war against Japanese aggression.
For those who are unaware, Kabaeva is not only Putin's mistress, but also the chairwoman of the board of directors of the National Media Group.
The film was so highly anticipated that it earned 10 times less than Cheburashka. The movie never managed to break even in Russia. With a budget of 785 million, the box office amounted to 690 million, of which 230 million in taxpayer rubles were given as non-repayable funds. On TV, these nuances will be hidden behind, such wording.
A joint film shot at the largest studio in China and in the most beautiful regions of Russia. A complex, ambitious project. Different film crews, different languages, different approaches, one result. In Russia, it has already achieved the best box office in its genre.
Yeah, what irony. They said, there's no money, but hang in there. So what do you think of our news? Let us know what we should change to become better. We will definitely take it into account. In the meantime, give this video a like to support what we do and be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our next episodes. See you soon!